Okay, looks like it's 12 o'clock. I'm thinking let's go ahead and get started. Hi everybody. My name is Hannah Weaver. I'm one of the inpatient chief residents at University of Washington Montlake. Thank you so much for coming today to our Department of Medicine Grand Rounds. There will be time at the end for questions and discussion, so please type your questions in the chat. First, to kick us off, I'm going to introduce Dr. Nisha Bensal. She is a nephrologist at the University of Washington, and she's the co-lead of our Gender Equity Council.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's my pleasure on behalf of the Gender Equity Council to host this special Medicine Grand Rounds today. And to kick off this special Medicine Grand Rounds, we're going to be presenting our Gender Equity Awards, which were renamed last year after our first and former chair of medicine, Dr. Barbara Jung. And I'm thrilled that Dr. Jung can join us today to present the Barbara Jung Gender Equity Champion Awards. So Dr. Jung, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Nisha, for being thrilled. I'm more thrilled. This was so fun to do the inaugural last year, and it's even more fun to see that we have a sustainable pathway of women leaders coming. And so if you could bring the slides up. It is my absolute distinct pleasure to together with you recognize and celebrate the individuals. So we were looking for people who advance women and gender minorities in medicine through all the work that they're doing: mentorship, leadership, advocacy, teaching, and/or research. And I'm absolutely thrilled to present the two recipients of the 2026 award, Dr. Jennifer Ray and Dr. Tessa Steele. Next slide, please. So I'll start with Jennifer. Dr. Ray leads the gastroenterology dysmotility program. As many of you know, and those who don't know that I'm a gastroenterologist, GI dysmotility is experienced disproportionately by women. She has developed the division first ever motility curriculum for fellowship training, and is now available internationally, shaping the education of future gastroenterologists. And I can say that because I remain nationally involved, and this is a curriculum that has already had huge impact. She also leads the Women in GI Council, a group dedicated to supporting the unique needs of women. And she's a GI diversity, equity, inclusion, belongings champion. Congratulations, Dr. Ray. Tessa Steele is an active member of the Women of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine group. She's also a member of the division of the JEDI Research Work Group, where she leads efforts to advance health equity research. Dr. Steele has been tireless in her efforts. I remember that from my time there, and she has not stopped. She also serves on the Family Support Focus Group for the DOM at UW to identify ways to better support faculty with caregiving responsibilities, a never-ending task. She leads research examining barriers to physician-scientist careers, with particular attention to the experience of women trainees, especially those with caregiving responsibilities, more important than ever, and also individuals from historically marginalized groups. Congratulations, Dr. Steele.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Young. And the awardees will receive certificates and their names will be on a plaque. So please, congratulations again to Dr. Steele and Dr. Ray.
Awesome. Thank you for all the introductions, and congratulations, Tessa and Jennifer. I'm going to now introduce our distinct speaker for today for the special GEC Grand Rounds. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Julie Silver. She's the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Development and Success at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. She's also a professor with tenure in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehab. Dr. Silver was formerly an associate chair in the Department of PM&R at Harvard Medical School. She founded and previously directed the Harvard Medical School CME accredited course titled Career Advancement and Leadership Skills for Women in Healthcare that trained thousands of physicians and other healthcare leaders throughout the US and internationally. I could definitely go on and on telling about the accomplishments of Dr. Silver, but I would let her take it away with her talk today, The Science of Belonging, Strategies to Enhance Community, Connection, and Culture. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Silver.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the kind invitation and introduction, and a warm congratulations to the award recipients. That's wonderful. The objectives for this talk I put in an order that I sort of think about how to consider belonging and building a sense of belonging with yourself, as well as creating the conditions in which belonging would flourish for others. And so these are the steps. And when I think about it, the first thing I think about is that we really need to develop a deeper sense of belonging and understanding of belonging. Because belonging and studying belonging has actually been around for many, many years. And in academic medicine, we've only really recently started to be thinking about this, whereas social scientists and psychologists have been thinking about it for a long time. So if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we kind of go up the chain a little bit after we get, physiological food, water, shelter, and feel safe, and so on, then we get to this point where we start to think about belonging and love. And when you get up to the very top, that's when you kind of do your best work, but those other needs need to be met first. And so I'm kind of thinking back to, the many things that have happened in the past in terms of studying. How do we think about it now? Well, we think about it in terms of a feeling or a perception that's our own feeling or perception. So I can't wave my magic wand and say, you now feel like you belong. It's really something that is within ourselves and is influenced by different conditions and so on that we have. We know it's an essential component of a positive workplace environment, and that a lack of belonging is thought to be related to workplace attrition. So if we want to keep people in medicine, if we want to keep people at our institutions, if we want people to join our specialties and so on, then we do think that there needs to be some sense of belonging. And some of my work that I'll show you later really bears that out. There's not a great synonym for belonging. Maybe the closest thing would be social integration, but really there's not a great synonym. However, if you're thinking about an antonym, you might be thinking about loneliness. There's also this term called thwarted belongingness, which comes into play as well. So just kind of, again, looking at the literature, thinking about definitions and where we have come to understand this in academic medicine. Certainly, loneliness has been something that people have been talking about. This is the former U.S. Surgeon General's report, in which they, really talked about how bad loneliness is for our health. And we've been studying loneliness for quite a while and doing a number of different types of studies, including clinical trials. But we haven't really been studying belonging as much. You see a lot of narrative reports and commentaries and things like that, but you don't really see a lot of studies actually on belonging. And this was a letter to the editor that one of my mentees wrote. And when she wrote that letter to the editor, I said, hey, let's go to clinicaltrials.gov and just compare how many studies have been done on loneliness versus how many have been done on belonging. So we see that a lot more has been done on loneliness, and so we have opportunities for sure to do more research on belonging and really to understand it better. So kind of that's the first part, is just how do we understand belonging, and then how do we create it, create a plan to enhance our own sense of belonging is really step two. And I like this a lot because I think it's reassuring, which is that our own sense of belonging fluctuates. It goes up and down. We don't always feel the same sense of belonging that for all the time. In fact, even in a day, like I might say, oh, I feel such a strong sense of belonging being here and talking about gender equity issues or talking about, how important it is for everyone to feel a sense of belonging. And then I'll go somewhere else and I'll be like, ooh, I don't really feel like I belong here. So even within like the same day, the same workplace, you might go into one room, feel like you belong, go into another room and feel like, I don't feel so good about this. And also there's this idea of trait and state belonging. So trait belonging meaning a little bit more stable sense of belonging, sort of who you are. Are you generally optimistic? What kinds of experiences have you been through before? Have you been in situations, a loving family versus a family in which maybe you were rejected or whatever? And so trait belonging is sort of what you bring with you, if you will. And state belonging is the situation that you're in, and kind of what I was sharing with you, going from one room to another or whatever, one situation to another, is more like state belonging. It's a specific situation. There are ways to measure belonging, and these are some of the different tools that have been used to measure belonging. And then as you kind of think about like putting yourself in the middle and saying, here's these different situations that I have, like at work, you may feel like, okay, I've been here like 10 years. I really feel a stable sense of belonging in general. Or maybe you join a new group or a new medical society and you're like, oh, I don't really know these people. So you have different ways that you can actually, help yourself with a sense of belonging in terms of joining groups, thinking about your connections and so on. And I think that to me is really powerful because I like to be empowered. I like to feel like I have some control. And so knowing that I have some opportunities to enhance my sense of belonging is reassuring to me. This is, I just took these 3 pictures and kind of showed these different people. And I feel like they all have a somewhat similar kind of half smile, half smirk on their face. And the reason I put these up is because sometimes when we don't know, someone hasn't voiced what they're thinking, we fill in the blanks, we fill in the gaps. And so, let's say that I'm giving this talk and I see these 3 people and they're all kind of have the same look, but maybe I think that they have a different look. Maybe I think that, the one of them doesn't like me and doesn't like what I'm saying, and another one like really likes me and is cheering me on and so on. And basically what I'm doing is just making things up because they haven't told me what they think, and I've just decided based on my own beliefs and cognitive biases that I know what they're thinking. And you can call those inference errors, or you can call those confabulation, where I'm not actually lying because I'm not trying to say something that's not true. But I'm actually not telling them the truth either because I don't know what they're thinking. And so I'm just confabulating. I'm just making stuff up. And I believe the story because that's the only information that I think I have. So I always say be really careful about that. If you don't actually know what somebody is thinking, they haven't actually said what they're thinking, don't make assumptions about what they're thinking. So recognize, just like in summary, recognize that there's these fluctuations, narrow the gap between what you're, what you think and what is true, expectations and reality. And I really like this because I remember this psychiatrist saying this at a talk I was at. And one of the things that she said is, when you have expectations up here and their realities here, you start to feel really upset and you have a lot of moral injury in that space. If you have appropriate expectations and the reality is here, then you don't have so much moral injury. And so I thought about that a lot. And I thought about, I really want to make sure that I have appropriate expectations for a given situation. Consider how to navigate different groups. Avoid attribution errors or inference errors and those kinds of things because you really don't know the truth. And then also encourage a sense of belonging in others. And that's something that I really love is the more that I work at trying to help others feel a sense of belonging, the more I feel like I belong. And I do think there's a relationship there. So as we've had this deeper understanding of belonging, hopefully, and we're trying to empower ourselves to feel a sense of belonging more. But how do we then empower others to become champions of belonging or to create environments that support it? So these are kind of organizational culture initiatives or strategies or components. And, I really like the one second from the bottom, which is professional development, because I do a lot of faculty development and professional development. The other one I really like that people don't talk about a lot is rituals and traditions. And I think that those are really great. So, for example, one of the groups that I work with of mentees, we do this thing called High, Low, and Buffalo. And so we just talk about, what's something good that happened in the past month or so, what's something that's not so good. And Buffalo is something just random. And sometimes we don't have that much time and we'll just say, hey, let's just do Buffalo. And it's really interesting because they come up with all kinds of random things. I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. Like I would have never heard that from them if we didn't have this little ritual. And then when we've done it when there's been observers with other people, and people are like, what do you mean? What do you mean by buffalo? And they're like, oh, it's just something we do. And it's like, that's the connection, that ritual, that knowing what buffalo means and how we do it and so on is part of the ritual and part of feeling that sense of belonging with that mentee group. So I like that. I love rituals that are positive and supportive. And there's a lot of different types of rituals too. There's, for example, we just had a pinning ceremony at Wake Forest University School of Medicine for women who've made professor. And so they started that a number of years ago. And so every woman that gets to the level of professor, there's a pinning ceremony. And so again, that's a ritual. So what can we do right now? The second thing on this list I think is really interesting, and it's telling people they belong. So I give this example. What would happen if we had kids and we never ever told them we love them? We just said, you're great, you're special, you're wonderful. I really like how you did that, but we never ever ever said that we love them. And then we asked them, do your parents love you? And they said, well, they think I'm great. They think I'm special. I don't know. They never really said that they love me. So the same thing happens with belonging. Like we rarely use the phrase, you really belong here, or it's great that you belong here, or you're important to this institution and you really belong. Rarely do people hear that they belong with using those words of belong or belonging. And so it was funny. I was talking to this neurosurgeon and he said to me, Dr. Silver, are you suggesting that we tell our trainees and colleagues that we love them? And I said, no, but I do think it would be really great if you told them that they belong. And I said, in fact, I think coming from you, someone that might be a little bit reluctant to use that language might even be more powerful than from someone like me who's less reluctant to use that language. And, he just looked at me and thought about it. And I don't know if he ever used it, but it was really interesting conversation to have with him because I actually think that the more reluctant and resistant you are to telling someone they belong, probably the more powerful it's going to be to hear that. But I think we should all be saying that. So as we kind of think through, how we create cultures of belonging and things. One obvious one is mentorship, right? And in 2019, there was a big report that came out from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that this consensus report had 9 key recommendations, and one of them was to adopt an operational definition for mentorship. And a second one was number 5, these multiple mentorship structures. So not necessarily a one-to-one dyad where you work together for years, mentor, mentee, but rather, can you do speed mentoring? Can you use technology for mentoring? Are there different things that you could do? So I always point this report out because it's a really great report, and these 9 key recommendations, and then specifically a couple of things in here. So this is actually, I'm hoping this will play in just a second. Let me click on it and I'll see. But we started doing some micro learning mentoring minute videos. We changed our promotion criteria, and people weren't really sure exactly how to get promoted and things. And so we were like, okay, you belong. We want you to get promoted, and we're going to do these micro learning mentoring minute videos. So let's see if it'll play here for y'all.
I don't think I can hear it.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry that didn't play it. It's playing on my end. Can others hear it or no?
We can see it, but not hear it.
Same.
Okay.
Can't hear.
Okay. Okay. No worries. That's fine. I'm not going to play this sound then. All right. So let's go to the next one. Okay. This video is focused on partners, and we have actually partners and loved ones, a program called Helping Us Belong. And that's another thing that I think is really important is we recruit faculty, we recruit physicians and scientists and researchers, residents, etc. But we're really not thinking about their partners. And their partners need to feel a sense of belonging too if we're going to retain them. In fact, I think it's a really underserved group because we spend so much time recruiting that one person, but they're really part of a bigger family unit usually. And so we've been focusing on partners and loved ones and, asking them to be involved with things that we're doing, but also asking the faculty members about what's important to their partners. So mentoring circles is another thing, another way that we've been doing mentoring. Again, thinking through, all right, how can we do mentoring differently, make sure that we have a multimodal mentoring program, etc. And so we have these mentoring circles, and that's been really something that people have enjoyed a lot. We have mentoring drop-in sessions. They're like just pop-ups where we just pop up somewhere and we do mentoring. We do a lot of that around technology, and people love it. This is me, I used AI to make that picture. So that's AI's idea about me running around, just, trying to get everything done. And so speed mentoring. When I was at Harvard in the department, I would welcome new people and I would have a 30-minute mentoring session with them. And I would start out with basically saying, here's the value proposition for the department. It can be really challenging to join a new department. I want you to know that, you're not an imposter. We hired you and we know you're super talented. There'll be times when up days and not so good days and so on. Then I'll ask about their goals. I'll give specific advice and support for their goals. Talk to them about how we promote people so that to make sure that they know how Harvard Medical School promotes people. I'll give them an introduction to bibliometrics because that's the measurement of scholarly work, and Harvard really cares a lot about that. And then at the end, I will spend 5 minutes and I will say, you really belong here. This can be a really hard place to be sometimes for people, but you belong here. We wouldn't have hired you if you didn't belong. And I say that at Wake Forest, and I would say that anywhere that I was, because I really believe that's true. We also implemented stay interviews, and stay interviews, when we just announced that we were going to do stay interviews, people were so excited. They said, you want us to stay? You're going to do stay interviews? You want to know what we really think? And so stay interviews, best practices stay interviews are generally done orally. You're not asking people to fill out another survey, but in a conversation, and it could be the APR, the annual performance review, we would put in these 3 questions that the division chief or whatever would ask the faculty. And these questions were really specifically chosen to elicit both like pain points, but also aspirations, really trying to understand that. So another thing that I do frequently is I give people, again, in this 5 minutes, can I change someone's life in 5 minutes? The answer is yes. Ignite talks. These are 5-minute talks, and they're a certain style. You can kind of make them more or less like an Ignite talk if you want. But the idea is, it can be hard to give a lecture like I'm giving for a whole hour or whatever. A lot of people, when they're starting out, they don't have enough content. They're not enough of an expert to actually give a long talk. So this is a soundbite that helps them get in front of people, show what they can do, etc. I love the idea when departments will do this every single time they have grand rounds, that they'll give someone a 5-minute opportunity in their department to give a talk that's somewhat related to that grand rounds. I also will put in a lot of the talks that I give, I will ask somebody to do five minutes of that talk. And I've asked Zoe, for example, to do that with her sponsorship and explain that. Cultivate trust by improving interpersonal and organizational communication. Many of you have seen this book and know Amy Edmondson. She's done a lot of work in this area. Her work has really evolved in this area on psychological safety. And of course, these are some basic tenets of psychological safety. And remember when I was talking about expectations versus like what you experience? Well, here's the thing. A lot of our trainees believe that we can create psychologically safe environments 100% of the time. Not only trainees, but other people believe that too. And that's just not true. When you have a big organization, there's going to be pockets where it's psychologically safe and other places where it's not. And the same is true of patient safety. If we could make our entire organization perfectly safe, we'd never have QI, we'd never need it, we'd never have, M&M rounds, we'd never have any of that. But of course, we can't do that. And so I think it's really important to say that zero tolerance is not the same thing as 100% psychologically safe. We cannot make our organizations 100% psychologically safe, but we can have zero tolerance for behavior that makes it not psychologically safe. So forge bonds, build teams, groups, and communities that flourish. And again, I talk about the rituals, and I gave some examples of those. These are all, different types of rituals that can be important. And I really do believe that rituals can be really helpful to people. And how about making the business case? This is what people ask me about a lot. It's like, all right, so like, is it really worthwhile, and so on. And when you start thinking about retention versus attrition, or retention versus attrition, then it starts to get real. And I always think about this study that I led at Harvard Medical School. I led the retention study there, and there were 3 key findings. And we realized that we had some work to do to retain people. And I loved Harvard. I think Harvard does a great job. I really do. I think they really care. I think there's a lot of people that really, really care. But there's always work to do in any organization, and that includes, every organization in this country where academic medicine lives is we have work to do. But in the scenario in the study that I did, we had 157 physicians who left. And I said, what if 90% of those people still left? Because, we don't know exactly why they left. They could have passed away. They could be sick. They could have found a better job somewhere else, whatever. Let's say we still had 90% of them that they left anyway, but we were able to keep 10%. That would have saved $42 to $150 million. What if we just retained just five doctors? That still would have saved us a ton of money. These numbers add up so fast when you're talking about physician retention. And by the way, if you're looking for data on retention, AAMC has data for you, and you can access that. So people often ask me, what are the numbers? What numbers are you using? How are you using them? And these reports can help you with some of this information. If you don't have numbers for your own institution, these are pretty accurate, I think. And, most places will say it's about $1 million a doctor to recruit and things. But these are great resources, and they're hard to find. So I always encourage people to take a screenshot or whatever, because you'll be perhaps wanting these resources later. So when you think about retention or attrition, what you see are push and pull factors. And a lot of people think that you push them away and you pull them back. And that's not true. That's not how the literature reads. The way that it works is they both go the same direction. They both leave. So when you have push factors and they leave, and you have pull factors and they leave. So the push factors are things that happen at your institution that push them out. And pull factors are things that happen at other institutions that pull them in. And so there's a lot of literature on workforce, and this is the standard language that's used, push and pull factors. And so trying to figure out how to reduce push factors and how to make your own institution one of the ones that can pull people in, and how to, what I call, to think about stay factors. So this was actually a study that was done using Standpoint Survey AAMC data. And this was what they were trying to do is better understand what the phenotype for faculty who were at risk to leave. And you can see that belonging is on this. It's, in the top 10. But professional development was at the top. And as someone who does faculty development, I love that it was at the top, because I think, it just really means that our work in faculty development is really valuable. But it's also important to recognize that belonging is one of those things. And people leave, and they leave for multiple different reasons. It's not all the same reason, etc. But as they started looking at the phenotype, this is the phenotype that really stood out. And again, looking at professional development and feeling appreciated and so on. So this was a really important study. And this is a study that I led. And what we did is we looked at faculty and their intent to leave. And no surprise that people who were dissatisfied with their sense of belonging were 7 times more likely to leave. That wasn't surprising. You probably could have said that even before we did the study, although it was good, I think, that we showed this. It's one of the largest studies to date. And then number 3 was a little bit of a surprising finding. And I just want to spend a minute talking about that, because it's actually something I've thought a lot about. So faculty who reported a neutral sense of belonging were 3 times more likely to report intent to leave. And so what does that actually mean? Well, I think one of the things that we can take away from that is that people actually have to feel a sense of belonging in order to keep them. If someone says, I could take it or leave it, I don't really care, and you make them a better offer or make them, whatever, um, they're gone. And also for the number two folks that are really unhappy, those folks may be, you may not be able to really convince them that it's worth staying. They may already be out the door, not really the group that you can focus on. So if you're going to actually make a change, and remember that when I said, what if we could just keep 10%, just 10%, what if we could just change it a little bit? Maybe group number three is the one that we should be focusing on. Maybe the people who are neutral rather than the people that are deeply, deeply dissatisfied. So these are the kinds of things that we think about and talk about in faculty development, and I like to consider that. So as we kind of think through, and I want to, have some conversation around this. Hopefully, you have some questions, and maybe we can have a few comments. But as you kind of think through about strategies, going back to just really understanding, having a deeper sense of belonging, you will hear people talk about belonging all the time, and people, just naturally feel like they know what belonging is. But I really do refer people to the literature because I think it's really important. There's been many, many studies on this, many experts who have weighed in on this beyond academic medicine. And so I think that's really important. I think number two is to have some recognition that we can empower ourselves to have a greater sense of belonging, and that we can also create better spaces and cultures and so on that support others. Although we can't wave our magic wand, there's no leader that can say, all right, I'm going to make everyone feel like they belong. That's just not possible. And then cultivating trust and really improving communication and teams and so on. And then, thinking through the business case and making sure we really understand that having a sense of belonging actually may keep our people and create opportunities for access to care for our patients and so on. Whereas if we don't create that sense of belonging, we have the opposite effect. We don't keep our people, and we have more problems with access to care, and it hurts our patients, and it doesn't advance science and so on. So I like to, just kind of end with telling you all that you all belong, and so glad that you're here and you make a difference every day in the work that you do. And we need more people in medicine, and we need to do the best we can to keep our patients and be able to see our patients and advance science and educate future generations. So no one belongs here more than you. Thanks so much. Happy to take questions. An example of a buffalo. Oh, there's been so many. An example of a buffalo was, I mean, so many random ones, but one was this person went out to breakfast, and there were tons and tons and tons of bees all over like the food and whatever. And this person wasn't at all bothered, but everybody else at the table was like, oh my God, I can't eat that food. Just random things that people say and whatever. It's really interesting what they come up with. I'm excited to hear about the success of the mentoring and sponsorship circles. Can you tell us more about the optimal number for each and how you organize them? Okay, so yeah, those are great. So sponsorship, let me separate sponsorship and mentorship just for a minute. So sponsorship, I do that a lot in short increments, not necessarily like a circle, but like it'll be a 5-minute thing in one of my talks or in front of a bigger audience at a event that I'm hosting or whatever. Sometimes I'll host just a sponsorship party, and I'll have like 20 participants and then 10 or 15 sponsors. And usually and you have to just multiply that by 5. So it's as long as each person gets 5 minutes. So the party is as long as, in those 5 minute increments. And I do work with people to tee them up so that they have that. For the mentoring circles, one of the ways that we did that is we developed a new faculty development program, which was for new hires across our system. And Wake Forest University School of Medicine has two campuses, one in Charlotte and one in Winston-Salem. And we're the academic core for Advocate Health. So we're across multiple states. So we have faculty across multiple states. We have some really interesting things. For example, we have one IRB that goes across multiple states. So we have about 4,000 faculty across multiple states. And so we have this new hire program. And what we did was we had more than 200 new hires, physicians and scientists. And we created mentoring circles. And there were like two mentors and 8 people, 8 mentees in each circle. And we had 6 sessions and we had a template. So there was a theme for each one. And we built it out so that it covered topics that we thought would be really important to new faculty and that they could discuss in a mentoring circle. It aligned with the didactic content that we were giving. And it was pretty turnkey for the mentors, because one of the things that we hear is our faculty are really super busy, clinically demanding RVUs and things. And because we had such a big cohort, we wanted 2 mentors for each one so that there weren't cancellations and somebody could always fill in. So we created a template, and it was very formulaic, and they just could go through it and they could feel really confident about their mentoring this group, because all of this was new to them. All of this was new. So, many of them were like, they wanted guidance, they wanted support, etc. We just opened our second campus just recently. And so a lot of the doctors there had not been faculty before. They might have done some teaching before, but they weren't faculty per se, and they just wanted some more guidance. So we really developed the program that way to make it very formulaic and specific and so on, and it went really well. People can unmute too. Happy to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silver. That was great. I would love to just hear a little bit more about the avenue in which you did the 5 minute sessions where folks would kind of talk about themselves, and what sort of kind of like venue was that in, or what?
Sure. Yeah, so I've done that in a bunch of different venues. So one is a sponsorship party, and I will invite let's say 12 sponsees, and they each get 5 minutes. So and then 10 sponsors. And so the way that I usually do that is I'll do a little coaching session with them ahead of time. I'll look at their slide, make sure that I understand what their asks are. That's the hardest thing for people, is to ask for something specific. A lot of times what they'll say is, I want to get a grant. Well, on what? What kind of grant are we talking about? How much? Do you have any experience? Or I want to give talks, or, so it has to be something that somebody could actually do, because that's not realistic to just say something really broad like that. Nobody can actually fulfill that request for you. So, asking for things that are appropriate and specific enough that someone could sponsor for. I've also had people just drop in. So like when I'm invited for different talks, sometimes I'll say, oh, at your institution, let's have someone tee up a sponsor. I wish I would have done it this time too. Now that I'm talking about it, I really wish I would have done it, but you all can do it. It's super easy and fun. And so you can just have someone, get up and show their slide and talk about it, etc. I rewrote a definition for sponsorship for academic medicine to help people understand. And one of the things that I wrote was like, think about it as something on your CV. So is there something that you could actually put on someone's CV? That's really helpful rather than saying, you know, something that's like not really tangential. And the reason I said that is because in business, it works well to say that someone's really good and they should be promoted and things like that. And that works, sort of like betting on their future. Well, in academic medicine, there's two ways that people get promoted. The first way is like program director, chair, dean, that kind of thing. The second way is rank promotion, instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. And with rank promotion, you have to bring to the promotions committee things that people have already done. You can't say to the promotions committee, "Oh, I really like them. I think they'd be really good. I think in the future they'll do great things." Like that's not really appropriate or even ethical to kind of lobby for someone who doesn't have those things on their CV that they need. They haven't met the requirements. And so as I kind of explained where some of the disconnect is with how we adopted this concept from the business world, but it doesn't totally work in academic medicine. I came up with a new definition that would be sort of more aligned with what we actually need in academic medicine. And that's like real accomplishments documented on a CV that help with academic promotion.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. We have another question in the chat. How do you balance in-person versus virtual events? Getting people together in person seems more challenging at times.
It does seem more challenging at times. You're not wrong about that. I don't think we have the perfect balance, and I certainly don't have the perfect balance. Um, I was at an event yesterday and it was so great. It was in person and I just loved it. It was like, yes, I just love being around actual people in real life and it's so great. But I also would miss opportunities. Like I probably would miss this opportunity to connect with you all if I didn't do virtual. And as I said, our at Wake Forest, we're across multiple states and so on. So I think both have real value. One thing we've been doing, I mentioned doing drop-in sessions for mentoring. So speed mentoring, I'm a big fan of speed mentoring because just like I think that you can change someone's life in 5 minutes by giving them an opportunity or whatever, I think you can change someone's life in 5 minutes by giving them specific information that's very targeted and can really help them. So, so we have drop-in sessions that are virtual and we have them on very specific topics or whatever. But we also have like pop-ups and we'll just pop up somewhere and we'll drop in like at the doctor's lounge or in front of the cafeteria or in front of the research building. We'll just pop up and we'll hold a mentoring, speed mentoring. We love to give everybody swag. So we want to build professional identity and make them feel really good and make them feel like they belong. So we try to bring swag with us. Wake Forest University School of Medicine swag, and we like to feed them because they're happier when we feed them. And so, so we just try to show up with enthusiasm, information, things that will really help them, but also some love.
We have a question. How important is shared identity in finding mentors and or sponsors?
That's a great question. There's been a lot of debate about that. I mean, I can just tell you my opinion about it. I don't think there's an answer. I think that it's helpful if people understand, who you are and your background a little bit. But I also think that if you only have people who are similar to you, then you might miss out on opportunities and perspectives, and people that could, be different. So, for me, I'm someone who's going to really lift up all the faculty. And if someone said to me, well, you don't have a shared identity with me, then I'd be like, boy, like I could help you so much. Just give me a chance. I'm here. So, I mean, I think both. And I don't think you just need one mentor or one person. I think, get all the support where you can.
You gave some great, is it kind of specific recommendations for ways to, for maybe learners, for example, residents, to kind of ask for specifics regarding mentorship. And I'm curious, do you have any advice for maybe learners, such as like residents who want to take on a more mentorship role, but maybe don't have the bandwidth to like set up a session or something? Like how could they sort of incorporate that with learners on the team?
Yeah, that's great. So, there are a number of different ways. I mean, we just did a video on like the 1 minute preceptor, and that's something you can look up. Just like mentoring, literally, it's like a 1 minute kind of mentoring model that's used in medical education. Super helpful. That I think is a great way to kind of just work in, like, if you're a resident and you have a medical school who's trailing behind you, you can just use the 1 minute preceptor. Again, it's a standardized, well-known model, and that's a great way to do it. I think one of the mistakes I think that people make is just randomly asking someone to be their mentor, and what that person is hearing, what that attending physician is hearing is, you're asking me to do that one-to-one dyad and work with you for years, and that's a lot of time and effort, and I just don't know if I can take that on, and so on. And so I like to encourage people to get to know that individual a bit, see if your interests are aligned. And rather than just saying, will you mentor me? Ask them for information about something, or, if there's an opportunity to be a middle author on a paper, I have some time, or, whatever. I think that aligning your work more. I've had people ask me many, many times, you mentor me, and for example, their research might be in urology or something. And I'll be like, well, I'm not really a urologist. It's probably not a great fit. So, it just, I mean, if it's something that's like really way off from that person, on the other hand, if they were asking me about, they're doing whatever, something else, that was very much aligned, then that works. But I do think, like, sometimes what people hear is not really what you mean, but people have that idea of mentorship being a commitment that takes a really long time, etc. And that's one of the myths I'm trying to dispel, which is you can mentor someone really fast and make a difference.
Hoping you can share a moment where you personally felt either a strong sense of belonging or the absence of it, and really what made the difference there.
Yeah, well, when I went to med school, I I did not have very much information. I came from a family that did not have a lot of information about it. And so I got to med school and people were talking about all these things I didn't know. And so I really felt like, wow, like, I don't know if I belong here. I got good grades, but maybe you need to have more than good grades. And so it took me a while to figure things out. And I did figure it out. And it's one of the reasons I do the work that I do now, is because I actually don't want people to have as little information as I had, to start with. So I would say, that was hard for me. And when I went to med school, the proportions were very different than they are now. There's a lot more women in medicine now. So that also contributed, just not having an understanding of what was going to happen next and so on. I didn't understand, like, what internship was or what residency was or when I'd be done or how boards worked or, just any of that kind of thing. And then having a sense of belonging. I've had such a strong sense of belonging in so many different situations as I've moved forward. And I think part of it is being really intentional about about forming relationships. And one of the people, so two of the people that I'm really, really close to in my specialty, we do a lot of papers together, we work together a lot. I am very intentionally reached out and had coffee with one of them, didn't know her, etc., and said, I think we're kind of doing similar work, and here's a paper you did, and here's a paper I did, and would you like to collaborate? And if we collaborated, we could take turns being like first author and senior author, and then we can encourage some of our the people we mentor, and we published like 20 papers together, just like really intentionally, just kind of saying, hey, I see what you're doing. You see what I'm doing. Let's have a conversation. Let's try something together. And if that works out, we'll do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And, they're like, um, you know, some of my very, very, very best friends.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and giving this great talk. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And thanks for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, everybody.